I helped put a man in prison when I was 11. Years later a woman burned him alive in his home. I listened as she begged her father to stop, I listened to her cries, I listened to every second of her pleading until my stepdad called me home for dinner. When I was 11, I lived in a small apartment with my mom, stepdad, and sister. The apartment building was more of a house that had been split into 3 units rather than a traditional apartment complex. My family and I lived in the top apartment, while 2 families lived in the 2 remaining apartments below. Both families had children, but I made quick friends with the 9 and 10-year-old from the bottom apartment as we were closest in age. I remember going to their apartment to play during the summer while my mom, who worked nights, slept. We either played outside or we hung out in what could only be describing as a hoarder house, watching Olsen twin movies. One thing that stands out in my memory are the stacks and stacks of kids' movies, specifically every Olsen twin movie or show to ever exist. 33 years old now for time reference. I recall the older of the 2 girls, who I regrettably cannot recall either of their names, asked if I could spend the night once and her mother refused, adamantly refused. I recall one day her dad came home and asked me sit on his lap while he stroked my hair. Shortly after the mom angrily told me to go home. One night while me and the girls played outside, just as the sun was setting, the oldest asked me to sit outside her and her sister's bedroom window and just listen after they went inside. She didn't explain to me what I was listening for, she simply asked me to be a witness to whatever happened. So, I did. I listened as she begged her father to stop, I listened to her cries, I listened to every second of her pleading until my stepdad called me home for dinner. That night, I sat at the table, 11 years old, sick in my soul. I sat there frozen, not knowing what I was supposed to do. Unable to process what I'd just heard. My stepdad, after what seemed like an eternity, asked me what was wrong. I don't remember things clearly from that point. I know I told him what I'd heard. I know we spent the entire night at the police department. I know that man was arrested within the next few days. I watched as he was taken and as his family wept watching him go. I was never allowed to speak to those girls again. Soon after they moved. I can't remember their names, but I remember the name of the man that went to prison for 12 years for the molestation of his 2 young daughters. I remember at 12 being subpoenaed to court, though he pleaded guilty and I never had to testify. Years ago, I looked him up on Google, being curious about how much time he served and whether his children's names would be listed. I often think of those girls and hope they have found healing and happiness. What I found was not that information. He was burned alive in his own home by a woman. I can only imagine what horrific things he did that she had to take matters in her own hands. I cannot imagine the people he hurt after he was released. The world is better off without him in it, but that woman and most likely the children she was trying to protect, will continue to suffer because of that man. 6 years per kid. It's not enough. It will never be enough. I hate that that man's name is the only one I can remember and will remember for the rest of my life.
I'm so sorry you had to be a part of that. But you definitely did the right thing. You saved those girls. It could have been a lot worse had you not said anything. Wishing you peace and healing.
Thank you. Most of the time it doesn't ever cross my mind, but sometimes I'll have a day where it's all I think about and I weep for them, and I weep for Kid Me a little too. But most of all, I hope they healed because they went through the worst of it. On top of this, my biological father went to prison for the molestation of my 2 younger half-sisters. I never met the man, and he was so severely mentally ill when my mother fled he'd forgotten I'd ever been born. She left when I was 2 weeks old. He went to prison when one of them was 12 and the other around 9. I see those girls and my sister every time we chat. It hurts a lot to think of her going through what I heard. There are some truly evil people in this world, and I have somehow narrowly escaped the worst of them while also bearing witness to that evil. At this point I'm rambling, but thank you again for your kind words.